"You're coming with me," the rancher told the woman who had been beaten for giving birth to 3 girls. The sun was just beginning to rise over the small, dusty village, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. In one of the tiny mud brick houses at the edge of the village, Amina lay in the corner of a dimly lit room, her body weak and aching. She had just given birth, not to a boy, as her family had desperately hoped, but to a 3rd daughter. The cries of her tiny baby filled the room, a soft, innocent sound that should have brought joy. Instead, it was met with silence and heavy frowns from those who had come to see her. Amina had known from the beginning of her marriage that life would not be easy. Her husband, a quiet man who often spoke more with his eyes than his words, had told her once long ago that having sons was the only way to secure respect in their family and community. From the day she had married, Amina had felt the pressure of these unspoken rules pressing on her shoulders. Every time she fell pregnant, hope had flickered in her heart, only to be crushed when she learned she was expecting another daughter. The villagers were not kind. Whispers followed her wherever she went. People in the streets would shake their heads as she passed, muttering about her failure to produce a son. Even the midwife who had helped her during labor gave her a cold look instead of comfort, reminding her that she had once again brought disappointment into the world. Amina's spirit, though fragile, had never been completely broken. She had learned to survive on quiet endurance and careful steps, moving through her days as if walking on a thin, invisible thread. But that morning, the silence of the house was shattered by the arrival of her mother-in-law. A woman with sharp eyes and a voice sharper than knives, she had come to inspect the newborn and to deliver punishment. The moment she saw the tiny baby girl swaddled in a simple cloth, her face twisted in anger. 3 girls, she spat. 3. And not one son to carry this family forward. How many more failures will you bring? Amina tried to stay calm, her eyes focused on her small hands, trembling as they held her baby. She said nothing, knowing any defense would only anger the older woman further. But her mother-in-law would not stop there. She began to shout, her words cutting through the room like sharp stones, accusing Amina of being useless, of bringing shame to the family, and of failing in her most important duty. Her husband stood silently in the corner, his face unreadable. He had often told Amina that he loved her, that he wished she could be free from these pressures, but he had never intervened when his mother's anger flared. Today was no different. He said nothing as his mother's fist struck the wall, and as her words struck Amina's heart. The pain was not only in her body but in her soul. Amina had always believed that love and family should bring warmth and comfort. Instead, she felt trapped, suffocated by expectations she could not meet, and punished for circumstances beyond her control. Tears blurred her vision, but she dared not cry out. She could not let anyone see the depth of her fear and sadness, for it would only invite more scorn. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Amina remained huddled in the corner, holding her baby close. She whispered softly to the child, promising that one day the world would be kinder, that she would find a place where they could be safe and loved. The baby's small fingers curled around Amina's thumb, and for a brief moment, hope flickered in her heart. Despite the cruelty around her, life had a way of pushing forward, and Amina felt the faintest spark of determination. But the outside world was not forgiving. Neighbors began to gather outside the house, drawn by the commotion. Children peeked through the cracks in the walls, and older women whispered among themselves. Rumors had already begun to spread about Amina's failure, and she knew that the judgment of the village would not be kind. Each passing minute brought more pressure, more shame, and more fear. That evening, as the sky turned deep orange and then dark blue, Amina lay on the thin mat in her room, her body exhausted but her mind restless. She thought about the future, about the life her daughters would have if things continued as they were. Would they be treated the same way she had been treated? Would they grow up knowing only fear and shame? The thought made her heart ache, but it also strengthened her resolve. Somehow, she had to find a way to protect them. Somehow, she had to survive. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the cries of the baby and the occasional sharp voice of her mother-in-law, who prowled the house like a hawk. Amina dreamed of faraway places, of green fields and open skies, of a life where she could walk freely without fear of judgment. In her dreams, she was not weak or powerless. She was strong and unafraid, holding her daughters close as they laughed and played under the sun. These dreams, though fleeting, became her refuge, a secret place where hope could grow. The days that followed were a mixture of quiet endurance and small acts of defiance. Amina would go about her chores with careful precision, tending to the home and her children while keeping her thoughts private. She began to speak softly to her daughters, telling them stories of courage and resilience. Even though the world around them seemed harsh and unkind, she wanted them to know that they were valued, that their lives mattered. In the village, life continued as usual, oblivious to the suffering inside Amina's home. People went about their work in the fields, exchanged gossip in the market, and prepared for festivals, never realizing the quiet battles that women like Amina were fighting behind closed doors. It was a world that measured worth by birth and gender, a world that left little room for compassion. But Amina refused to let that world define her. She held onto the belief that one day she and her daughters could live differently. And so, Amina waited. She endured the whispers, the judgments, and the punishments, all while dreaming of a better life. She found strength in small moments. A smile from her baby, the warmth of sunlight on her face, the quiet thought that she was not entirely alone. Each day was a test of patience and courage, and though the path ahead seemed uncertain, she refused to give up. Little did Amina know, her life was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. The arrival of a stranger, a man from outside the village, would set in motion events that could alter her destiny forever. But for now, she remained in her small, dimly lit room, holding her newborn daughter close and whispering promises of hope into the quiet evening air. The story of her courage and survival was only just beginning. The morning sun rose again over the small village, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. Amina sat by the doorway of her home, cradling her newborn daughter and trying to catch a few moments of peace before the day began. Her body still ached from the recent birth, and her mind raced with worry about the future. She had learned to live quietly, hiding her emotions and obeying the unspoken rules of the village. Yet deep inside, a small part of her refused to surrender entirely to fear. It was during this quiet moment that a stranger appeared on the horizon. He was a tall man, dressed simply but neatly, with a calm and determined expression. His name was Tariq, a rancher from a distant town who had traveled to the village on business. He came not for trouble, not for judgment, but for reasons that had nothing to do with the harsh customs of Amina's world. As he approached the village, he noticed the subtle signs of hardship etched into the faces of the villagers. But it was the sight of Amina, sitting quietly with her baby, that caught his attention most of all. Tariq had always believed in fairness, kindness, and the dignity of every person. His work on the ranch had taught him the value of patience and hard work, and he had seen enough of the world to understand that life was often unfair. But he had also learned that one small act of courage, one decision to help, could change the course of someone's life forever. When he saw Amina, he sensed that she was someone who needed help, and that help could come from him. He approached her slowly, careful not to startle her. The villagers watched with curiosity, unsure of who this man was or why he had come. Tariq's eyes met Amina's, and for a brief moment, a silent understanding passed between them. He could see the fear, the exhaustion, and the pain in her eyes. But he could also see something else, a spark of determination, a hidden strength that had survived despite everything. "Are you alone?" he asked gently, his voice calm and steady. Amina hesitated. She had learned not to trust easily, especially strangers, but there was something different about this man, something that made her pause before turning him away. "I am," she whispered finally, her voice trembling. "I have no one." Tarek nodded, understanding that words alone were not enough. He looked around the village and saw the judgment in the eyes of the people nearby. The gossip, the whispers, and the harsh expressions told him all he needed to know. He had seen this kind of cruelty before, and he had promised himself that he would act when he could. "You don't have to stay here," he said softly. "You don't have to live like this. Come with me, I can take you somewhere safe." Amina's heart raced. The words were like a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea. Part of her wanted to run, to escape, to believe that freedom was possible, but another part was terrified. What if this stranger was not as kind as he seemed? What if leaving her home meant losing everything forever? She looked down at her baby and felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest. She could not afford to make a mistake. Tarek sensed her hesitation and did not push. He simply knelt down slightly to be closer to her level and spoke again. "I know it's hard to trust someone you don't know, but I promise I am not here to hurt you. I want to help you and your daughters. You deserve a life without fear." Amina's eyes filled with tears. She had never been spoken to like this, never been offered kindness without judgment or expectation. The softness in Tarek's voice, the sincerity in his eyes, and the calmness of his presence began to dissolve some of the fear that had held her for so long. Slowly, carefully, she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will come with you." Tarek smiled gently, knowing that the first step toward a new life was often the hardest. He extended his hand, and Amina took it, holding on tightly as if anchoring herself to something solid in a world that had always seemed unstable. Together, they left the small house behind, stepping into the open sunlight where the villagers' eyes followed them with curiosity and suspicion. The journey out of the village was not easy. The paths were dusty and uneven, and Amina had to move slowly, still recovering from childbirth. Tarek supported her, walking beside her with patience and care. He encouraged her gently, giving her small moments to rest and recover. The baby, sensing the change in her mother's mood, remained calm in Amina's arms, a tiny, fragile symbol of hope for the future. As they walked, Tarek spoke quietly about the world beyond the village. He told her about the ranch, about the animals and the open fields, and about the people who lived there with respect and kindness. Amina listened, her heart opening to the possibility that life could be different. She had never imagined a place where she would not be judged for having daughters, where she could care for her children without fear of punishment or ridicule. The journey took hours, and the sun climbed high in the sky. At times, Amina felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her, and doubts crept into her mind. Could she really leave everything behind? Could she trust this man to keep his promise? But every time fear threatened to take over, she looked down at her baby and felt a surge of determination. She had survived so much already, and she could survive this too. Tarek noticed her struggles and offered quiet encouragement. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Every step you take is a step toward freedom." Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they reached the outskirts of Tarek's ranch. It was a place unlike anything Amina had ever seen. Wide, open fields stretching as far as the eye could see, animals grazing peacefully, and a simple, sturdy house that seemed to promise safety and shelter. Amina paused for a moment, taking in the sight, and felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Could this really be her new home? Tarek guided her inside, showing her a small, comfortable room where she and her baby could rest. There was fresh water, clean bedding, and a sense of calm that was entirely new to her. For the first time in years, Amina felt a flicker of hope that perhaps life could be different, that she could raise her daughters without fear, and that she could finally begin to heal from the wounds of the past. Over the next few days, Tarek treated Amina with respect and patience. He did not rush her or demand anything from her. Instead, he encouraged her to rest, to recover, and to slowly regain confidence in herself. Amina began to realize that the kindness she had received was not temporary or conditional, it was real, and with each passing day, she felt a small but growing sense of security and belonging. Amina also began to observe the world around her in a new way. The ranch was full of life, not just in the animals and the open fields, but in the way people treated one another. There was respect, cooperation, and a sense of fairness that she had never experienced in her village. Slowly, she began to imagine a life where her daughters could grow up strong and free, without the fear and judgment that had defined her own childhood. But the journey was not over. Amina knew that the world beyond the ranch could still be dangerous, that the village and its cruel traditions were not so easily left behind. She understood that she would need to be brave, to make decisions that required courage, and to trust herself in ways she never had before. The first steps of freedom were behind her, but the road ahead was still long and uncertain. Even so, Amina felt something she had not felt in years: hope. It was a fragile, delicate thing, like a small flame flickering in the wind, but it was enough to keep her moving forward. And for the first time, she allowed herself to dream of a future where she and her daughters could live without fear, where kindness and respect could replace cruelty and judgment, and where the love she felt for her children could grow freely. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Amina held her baby close and whispered promises of a better life. She did not yet know all the challenges that lay ahead, but she knew one thing with certainty. She had taken the first step toward freedom, and nothing could take that away from her. The first morning at the ranch arrived with the soft light of dawn spilling over the wide, open fields. Amina woke to a quiet she had never known in her life, a peaceful, gentle stillness that contrasted sharply with the constant tension and noise of her village home. Birds sang in the trees, and the breeze carried the faint scent of grass and earth. For the first time in years, she felt the strange mixture of calm and cautious hope. Amina carefully rose from the simple bed Tarek had prepared for her, holding her baby close. The little one stirred in her arms, yawning and stretching tiny fingers, unaware of the journey that had brought them here. Amina's heart swelled with love and responsibility. She had survived so much, endured so many harsh words and cruel actions, and yet here she was, finally in a place where she could breathe, where she could think about a future rather than merely surviving the present. Tarek appeared in the doorway carrying a tray with warm milk and some bread. His presence was calm and steady, offering reassurance without demanding anything. "Good morning," he said softly. "I thought you might be hungry." Amina nodded, managing a small, grateful smile. She had learned to be cautious with trust, but the way Tarek treated her, gently, respectfully, without expectations, was slowly teaching her that not everyone would judge or hurt her. She accepted the food quietly, her hands trembling slightly from a mix of hunger, fatigue, and relief. After breakfast, Tarek suggested they take a walk around the ranch. The field stretched endlessly, dotted with grazing animals and clusters of trees that swayed lightly in the wind. The ranch was alive with movement, yet peaceful, and Amina found herself captivated by the beauty and openness of it. She had never known a life so vast, so free from the constant scrutiny of others. As they walked, Tarek explained the work he and his family did. He spoke about caring for the animals, planting and harvesting crops, and maintaining the land. Everything was done with patience, respect, and care, a stark contrast to the harsh, judgmental rules of Amina's village. She listened attentively, fascinated by the way life on the ranch was based on cooperation and compassion rather than fear and punishment. Amina began to realize that the ranch was not just a physical safe place. It was a place where she could rebuild her confidence and her identity. For the first time, she could imagine contributing to something meaningful, learning skills she had never had the chance to explore, and being valued for her efforts and her intelligence, rather than her ability to produce sons. Days turned into weeks, and Amina slowly adjusted to her new life. She learned how to care for the animals, feed the chickens, and tend to the garden. Tariq guided her patiently, explaining each task and allowing her to learn at her own pace. At first, she struggled with exhaustion, both from the physical demands of the work and from the emotional weight she carried. But each small success gave her a sense of accomplishment she had never felt before. The baby grew healthier and stronger each day, her laughter and coos filling the small house with joy. Amina's bond with her child deepened, and she began to find comfort in routines and responsibilities that had once seemed overwhelming. The rhythm of ranch life, feeding the animals, tending the garden, preparing meals, became a source of stability and healing. Tariq never treated her as a burden or a child. He spoke to her as an equal, respecting her opinions and decisions. Slowly, Amina began to regain the confidence she had lost over years of abuse and oppression. She realized that she could make choices, that her voice mattered, and that she could protect and provide for her children. These realizations, small but powerful, began to reshape her sense of self. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the fields, Amina sat with her baby under a large oak tree. She watched the animals grazing nearby and listened to the sounds of life around her. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream openly. She imagined her daughters growing up in safety, learning, playing, and exploring without fear. She imagined teaching them about courage and kindness, and seeing them become strong, confident young women. Despite the peace of the ranch, Amina's mind occasionally wandered back to the village. She worried about the families she had left behind, about the whispers and judgments that continued even in her absence. She knew that while she had escaped, the cruel traditions and expectations of her village were still very real for others. These thoughts were painful, but they also reinforced her determination to make the most of her new life. She wanted to be an example of courage and resilience, a living proof that it was possible to break free from oppression. Tariq noticed her occasional moments of worry and offered reassurance without prying. "You have come a long way," he said one evening as they walked along the edge of the fields. "You're stronger than you think, and every day you prove that. You've earned the right to build the life you want." His words touched Amina deeply. They reminded her that she was not alone, that support and kindness were not weaknesses but strengths. The bond between them, built on trust and respect, became a source of strength. Tariq's patience and understanding allowed her to heal gradually, giving her the space to process her past without being overwhelmed by it. As the weeks passed, Amina's confidence grew. She started to explore new ideas, thinking about how she could contribute not only to the ranch, but also to the wider world. She realized that her experiences, as painful as they had been, had given her insight and resilience that could help others. She began to dream of teaching women like her daughters to stand up for themselves, to find ways to survive and thrive even in difficult circumstances. The baby continued to grow, her laughter and curiosity brightening Amina's days. Amina learned to read her expressions, understand her needs, and communicate love through gentle words and touch. This bond became a source of profound healing for Amina, helping her to trust in her own strength and in the goodness of the world around her. One afternoon, while working in the garden, Amina met other helpers on the ranch, people who had faced challenges of their own, but had found a place where they could contribute and be valued. Their kindness and cooperation further reinforced her belief that life could be different, that people could treat each other with respect and empathy. She began to see that she was part of a larger community, one where compassion and hard work mattered more than fear or judgment. As months passed, Amina noticed changes not only in herself but also in her daughters. Even the youngest, who had barely opened her eyes when they arrived at the ranch, began to grow strong and healthy. Their laughter became a symbol of hope, a reminder of the life they had fought to find. Amina realized that the small victories, feeding the animals, planting seeds, teaching her daughters simple lessons, were building a foundation for a future she had never dared to imagine. Amina also began to reflect on the emotional journey she had undertaken. She realized that survival was not just about escaping danger, but about reclaiming one's sense of self. She had spent years hiding, obeying, and enduring. Now she was learning to live fully, to embrace the possibilities before her, and to trust herself to make the right decisions. Each step forward, however small, was a triumph over the fear and oppression that had once defined her life. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of gold and pink, Amina sat outside the house, watching her daughters play on the grass. Tariq joined her quietly, sitting nearby without interrupting. For the first time, Amina felt a sense of completeness, a quiet, steady happiness that had nothing to do with wealth or recognition, but everything to do with freedom, safety, and the love she shared with her children. She whispered to herself, "We are safe now. We can grow. We can live." It was not a boast or a promise to anyone else, but a statement of truth to herself. She had endured, survived, and now she was beginning to thrive. The past still lingered in her mind, but it no longer held power over her. She was free to create her own path, to raise her children in a world of possibility rather than fear. Amina's life at the ranch became a story of small but meaningful victories. Every day brought new challenges, but each challenge was met with growing strength and resilience. The bond she shared with Tariq, built on mutual respect and trust, became a cornerstone of her confidence. The ranch itself, with its open fields and cooperative community, offered not just safety but a place to grow, to heal, and to dream. By the end of the first year at the ranch, Amina had transformed. She had gone from a frightened, beaten woman to someone who carried herself with quiet confidence. She knew that the journey ahead would not always be easy, but she had learned the value of hope, patience, and perseverance. She had learned that life could be kind, that people could be trustworthy, and that she had the strength to overcome even the deepest wounds. As she watched her daughters playing under the sun, laughing freely for the first time in their lives, Amina realized that this was only the beginning. She had survived the cruelty of the past, but she was determined to build a future full of love, freedom, and opportunity, not just for herself, but for her daughters and for anyone who would one day need her guidance and courage. Months had passed since Amina and her daughters had arrived at the ranch. The seasons were changing, and the world outside seemed vast and full of life, a sharp contrast to the oppressive and harsh environment she had escaped. Each day at the ranch was a mixture of work, learning, and quiet moments of reflection. Amina had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own abilities than she had ever been in her life. Yet, she also began to understand that freedom was more than just escaping danger. It was about building a life, step by step, with purpose and care. The mornings at the ranch had become a time of routine and productivity. Amina would wake before sunrise, the cool air brushing against her face as she stepped outside with her daughters. The little ones were learning quickly, imitating her movements, helping in small ways, and discovering the joys of freedom in a safe environment. Feeding the animals, gathering eggs, watering plants, every task was a lesson, not only in practical skills but also in patience, responsibility, and the joy of contributing to something meaningful. Amina discovered that life at the ranch was teaching her more than survival. It was teaching her independence. Tariq encouraged her to make decisions, to take responsibility for managing parts of the ranch, and to learn how to organize daily work. He never belittled her or treated her as inexperienced. Instead, he guided her, offering advice when needed but allowing her to discover solutions on her own. This trust was new to Amina, and at first she struggled with it, afraid of making mistakes. But slowly she began to see that her judgment mattered, that her choices could have positive effects, and that she was capable of much more than she had been allowed to believe. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, Amina noticed how much the land had changed under her care. The plants were thriving, the flowers blossoming, and the vegetables ripening in the sun. She felt a deep sense of pride in what she had accomplished. In the village, she had been told that women like her were failures, unworthy, and incapable of making meaningful contributions. Here, she could see tangible proof of her abilities. The success of her work was a reminder that her life mattered, that she could achieve more than mere survival. Her daughters thrived as well. The youngest had grown stronger, her laughter filling the air, while the older girls were learning quickly, exploring the fields, observing the animals, and asking endless questions about the world around them. Amina encouraged their curiosity, teaching them simple lessons about nature, responsibility, and kindness. She wanted them to grow with confidence, to know that they were valuable and capable of making choices for themselves. Every smile, every moment of curiosity, reinforced Amina's belief that she had made the right decision to leave the village. Yet, Amina's journey of healing was not entirely without challenges. Occasionally, memories of the village would return unexpectedly, bringing with them the old fears, insecurities, and guilt. She would think of the people she had left behind, the mother-in-law's harsh words, and the judgmental stares of villagers. These memories were painful, but they also served as reminders of how far she had come. She had survived abuse, oppression, and isolation, and now she was learning to live with dignity and strength. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, Amina sat with Tariq near the edge of the fields. Her daughters were playing nearby, their laughter echoing in the open air. "I never thought I could feel safe like this," she said softly, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. "I never thought I could be happy." Tariq listened quietly, offering a gentle smile. "Happiness is something you earn, Amina," he said. "Not by chance, but by the courage you've shown and the choices you've made. You've worked hard, you've cared for your children, and you've rebuilt your life. That is what makes this happiness real." Amina felt a swell of gratitude. She realized that Tariq's support had been important, but the strength she had found within herself was even more powerful. She had endured years of hardship, and now she was learning that resilience and courage could shape a new reality. She felt ready to face whatever challenges might come, knowing that she was no longer powerless. As the weeks turned into months, Amina became more independent. She began to manage daily routines for the ranch, teaching her daughters how to care for animals, grow plants, and handle small responsibilities. The trust Tariq had placed in her allowed her to grow, and the confidence she gained in these tasks reinforced her sense of self-worth. She began to realize that independence was not just about survival. It was about creating a life of her own, a life that could be rich with meaning, joy, and love. But independence also meant preparation for challenges beyond the ranch. Amina knew that while she and her daughters were safe here, the world outside could be unforgiving. She began to think about ways to protect her children and ensure that they would always have choices, education, and opportunities. She understood that her past experiences gave her insight that could guide her daughters and perhaps others who might face similar hardships. Amina also began to form connections with others in the wider community. Occasionally, people from nearby towns or ranches would visit, bringing news, supplies, or simply sharing stories. Amina listened and learned, observing how different people lived, worked, and supported one another. She realized that life could be cooperative and nurturing, that community could exist without judgment, and that relationships could be built on trust rather than fear. One day, while repairing a fence on the outskirts of the ranch, Amina had a realization. She had spent so many years believing that she was powerless, that her fate was determined by the people around her. Now, she saw clearly that she had choices, that she could act, and that she could shape her own destiny. This realization was liberating, and it deepened her commitment to her daughter's future. She wanted them to grow up knowing their value, their strength, and their right to live freely. As the year progressed, Amina's confidence and skills grew. She learned to manage resources, care for animals, and make thoughtful decisions. Her daughters thrived under her guidance, developing curiosity, resilience, and a sense of safety they had never known. The ranch became more than a home. It became a place of growth, learning, and transformation. Amina also began to dream beyond the immediate safety of the ranch. She thought about ways to help women and children who were still trapped in oppressive situations. She imagined a network of support, a place where kindness and understanding could replace fear and judgment. While she knew this was a distant goal, the very act of imagining it gave her hope and a sense of purpose. Evenings at the ranch were often quiet, filled with reflection and gratitude. Amina would sit by the fire, her daughters resting nearby, and think about the journey that had brought them here. She remembered the pain, the fear, and the struggle, but she also remembered the courage and the small victories that had carried her forward. She realized that survival was just the beginning, that true life required courage, vision, and the willingness to embrace change. Through all these experiences, Amina discovered the power of patience. She had learned that healing was not instantaneous, that rebuilding one's life took time, effort, and resilience. Every day offered new lessons, small victories, and moments of joy that reinforced the life she was creating. She began to feel a deep sense of accomplishment, not only for herself but for her daughters, who were growing strong, confident, and happy. Amina also began to reflect on the importance of kindness and compassion. She had suffered at the hands of people who judged and punished her unfairly, and now she understood how crucial it was to treat others with respect and care. She made it a point to nurture her daughters with patience, love, and understanding, showing them that empathy and courage could coexist, and that life could be built on hope rather than fear. As the seasons changed, Amina continued to grow, both in her abilities and in her spirit. The ranch had become a place of freedom and empowerment, and she realized that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Her daughters were thriving, her confidence was blossoming, and her vision for a better future was expanding beyond the boundaries of the ranch. Amina knew that challenges would continue to come, but she felt ready to face them. She had learned to rely on herself, to trust in her own strength, and to create a life full of meaning, love, and opportunity. The journey from fear and oppression to freedom and empowerment had not been easy, but it had transformed her into a woman capable of guiding her daughters and inspiring others. As she watched the sun set over the wide fields, casting a warm glow over the ranch, Amina felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope. She had escaped the cruelty of her past, embraced the opportunities of the present, and begun to shape a future filled with promise. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but she also knew that she was no longer defined by fear or oppression. She was free, strong, and ready to live fully for herself and for her daughters. Time at the ranch passed quickly, yet it brought a sense of calm and stability that Amina had never known before. The wide fields, the gentle rhythm of work, and the warmth of a safe home created an environment in which she could truly breathe for the first time in years. She had grown stronger, not only physically but emotionally, and she was beginning to understand the power of resilience, courage, and hope. The scars of her past remained, but they no longer defined her. She was learning to transform them into lessons, wisdom, and determination for herself and her daughters. Amina's daughters were flourishing in this new life. The older girls were curious, playful, and confident, exploring the fields, tending to small animals, and learning about the natural world. They asked endless questions, and Amina took every opportunity to teach them, gently explaining the importance of kindness, responsibility, and strength. The youngest, once fragile and quiet, now laughed freely and moved with energy, her tiny hands reaching for everything in wonder. Watching them, Amina felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. Their happiness and health were proof that she had made the right choice in leaving the village. The bond between Amina and Tariq had grown steadily over time. While he had been her protector and guide initially, their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect and understanding. Tariq treated her as an equal, listening to her opinions, valuing her insights, and giving her space to grow and make decisions. He never imposed his will, instead encouraging her to trust herself, recognize her abilities, and embrace her independence. This supportive partnership was something entirely new for Amina, a stark contrast to the oppressive environment she had endured in her village. Amina began to take a more active role in managing the ranch. She coordinated tasks, helped train workers, and learned how to maintain the property efficiently. Each responsibility she took on increased her confidence and sense of purpose. She had once believed that her worth was limited to the expectations of others, but now she understood that her abilities, hard work, and intelligence mattered. Every day brought small successes, plants thriving under her care, animals healthy and well-fed, and the ranch running smoothly. These victories, though seemingly ordinary, were deeply meaningful to Amina, reinforcing her sense of empowerment. Despite her growing confidence, Amina remained mindful of the challenges that lay beyond the ranch. She knew that the world was not always safe, and she wanted to ensure that her daughters could face life with courage and knowledge. She began teaching them practical skills, how to care for animals, tend to plants, and handle basic tasks independently. She also taught them about respect, empathy, and the importance of standing up for themselves. Amina wanted her daughters to know that their lives had value, that their voices mattered, and that they could make choices for their own future. Amina also began to think about others who were still trapped in environments like the one she had escaped. She reflected on the women and children who faced cruelty, oppression, and discrimination, unable to find a way out. Her own experiences gave her insight into their struggles, and she realized that her journey could serve a greater purpose. She wanted to help, guide, and inspire others to find hope and strength. Even small acts of kindness, she understood, could have a powerful impact. One day, a woman arrived at the ranch seeking work and guidance. She reminded Amina of herself at the same age, tired, fearful, and uncertain. Amina welcomed her warmly, showing patience and compassion, and began teaching her the skills needed to work and care for the ranch. Through this act, Amina realized that her experiences had transformed her into someone capable of lifting others, of being a source of hope and encouragement. She began to understand that empowerment was not only about her own life, but about helping others find the courage to live fully and freely. Over time, Amina began to reach out to other nearby villages quietly, learning about the challenges women faced and offering support in ways she could. She shared knowledge, taught practical skills, and inspired confidence in those who had once been silenced or oppressed. Though she never forced anyone to change, she led by example, showing that life could be built on respect, patience, and kindness rather than fear and judgment. Slowly, she became a symbol of hope in the region, though she never sought recognition or praise. Amina's own life continued to grow richer and more fulfilling. She explored new interests, learning about farming techniques, animal care, and practical household management. She discovered her own talents and strengths, realizing that life was full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Each day, she taught her daughters by example, showing them that courage, perseverance, and compassion were powerful tools for navigating life. Her home became a place of learning, growth, and joy, a sanctuary in which freedom and opportunity were abundant. The relationship between Amina and Tariq remained strong, based on trust, mutual respect, and shared values. He continued to support her independence, giving her space to lead, make decisions, and pursue her goals. Amina, in turn, appreciated the stability, protection, and encouragement he provided. Their partnership was a balance of guidance and autonomy, allowing Amina to thrive while maintaining her sense of self. She realized that healthy relationships were built on trust, respect, and shared effort, a stark contrast to the oppression she had once known. As her daughters grew, Amina encouraged them to explore their own interests and passions. She wanted them to understand that life was not limited by gender, circumstance, or expectation. She spoke to them about courage, resilience, and the value of education, and she taught them to treat others with kindness and respect. Through these lessons, she instilled in them a sense of self-worth and confidence that had once been denied to her. Amina also reflected on the importance of hope. She had survived abuse, fear, and judgment, and she understood that hope had been her anchor throughout the darkest moments. She realized that hope was not passive. It was an active choice, a commitment to believe in possibilities and take steps toward change. By nurturing hope in herself and her daughters, she ensured that their future would be defined not by fear, but by courage, determination, and love. The ranch became more than a home. It became a center of growth and transformation. Amina's efforts to help others, guide her daughters, and maintain a life of dignity and purpose created a ripple effect. Workers, neighbors, and even visitors began to see the power of compassion and resilience in action. Amina's life had become a living example of the strength of the human spirit and the impact of kindness and empowerment on individuals and communities. Amina also allowed herself moments of reflection and gratitude. She would sit quietly in the evening, watching the sun set over the fields, and think about how far she had come. She remembered the fear, pain, and oppression of her village life, and she marveled at the courage that had brought her to this point. The journey had not been easy, but it had transformed her into a woman capable of facing the world with confidence, compassion, and determination. Even as she embraced this new life, Amina remained humble. She understood that every person's journey was different, and she respected the struggles of others. She focused on offering guidance, support, and hope wherever she could, knowing that empowerment was contagious. By helping others, she reinforced her own sense of purpose and created a legacy of resilience and kindness that would extend far beyond the boundaries of the ranch. Amina's daughters grew stronger and more confident each day. They learned not only practical skills but also the values that had shaped their mother: courage, resilience, empathy, and hope. They began to understand that their worth was not defined by others' expectations, but by their own actions, choices, and integrity. Amina took joy in watching them discover their potential, knowing that she had played a crucial role in giving them the tools to navigate life with confidence and dignity. As the years passed, Amina's story became one of transformation and inspiration. She had emerged from the shadow of fear, oppression, and judgment to create a life of independence, safety, and purpose. Her experiences had taught her the importance of hope, courage, and self-worth, and she had passed these lessons on to her daughters and to others in her community. The life she had built at the ranch was a testament to the power of resilience, the impact of kindness, and the possibility of change, even in the face of great adversity. In quiet moments, Amina would reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the fear, the pain, and the uncertainty of her early years, and she acknowledged the courage it had taken to step forward, to trust Tariq, and to embrace a new life. She understood that her strength had always been within her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Now, she was living proof that courage, hope, and determination could transform lives. Amina also recognized that her journey was far from over. Life would continue to bring challenges, both expected and unforeseen, but she faced them with confidence, grounded in the lessons of her past and the support of her present. She knew that she could navigate difficulties with patience, wisdom, and courage, and that her daughters would grow to do the same. Together, they had created a life full of love, freedom, and opportunity, an existence that had once seemed impossible, but was now their reality. And so, Amina's life became a story of hope, empowerment, and transformation. She had escaped a world of oppression and fear, and in its place, she had built a life of dignity, independence, and purpose. Her daughters thrived under her guidance, learning the values and skills necessary to live boldly and freely. Through her actions, she inspired others to believe in their own strength and the possibility of change. Amina's journey was not only about survival, it was about reclaiming life, embracing freedom, and nurturing hope. She had proven that even in the darkest circumstances, courage, kindness, and determination could create a future full of promise. And as she looked across the ranch, watching her daughters laugh and play in the sunlight, she knew that every step she had taken, every choice she had made had led to a life worth living, a life defined not by fear, but by hope, resilience, and love.